We all brick sometimes. And with how insanely fast the Digimon TCG has become, it can feel gut-wrenching to slam a big body and pass over a ton of memory. Hell, passing over 3 memory is enough to ruin your day sometimes. But what if I told you that there was an archetype that doesn't really sweat giving your opponent upwards of 10 memory every turn? Even weirder, it's an archetype that largely does away with the most fundamental mechanic in the Digimon TCG, Digivolution. It's the cardboard embodiment of go big or go home, and it had absolutely terrifying success in the game's earliest era. That's right, everyone. It's time we talk about Megazoo. So, what is Megazoo exactly? Megazoo is a broad term used to describe decks that center around slamming down powerful level 6 Digimon instead of taking the time to digivolve up a stack. From there, you use these hefty hitters to trample over your opponent and grind them into the dust. As an archetype, Megazoo is special in that it often bends or breaks the mechanics of the game to its advantage. Specifically, it does this in 3 ways: by ignoring color requirements, by using security as removal, and third, it exploits the memory system. Let's start with the first way Megazoo breaks the game: ignoring color requirements. In the Digimon TCG, color matters a lot. In most cases, Digimon can only digivolve on cards of a corresponding color. For example, Beelzemon can only digivolve on a purple level 5. You also need a permanent source of one color in play in order to cast most option cards. The restrictions around color are one of the ways to prevent unintended interactions and abuse of certain cards. But hard-playing Digimon is not color dependent. As long as there's enough memory available, you can play a Digimon of any color you want. So, where conventional decks are largely restricted to 1 or 2 colors as they digivolve up their lines, Megazoo is free to toolbox its deck, playing bodies in every conceivable color without affecting its quote-unquote consistency. And thanks to this flexibility, Megazoo basically was the game's first toolbox deck. And back at the start of the game, in an era dominated by vanillas and very basic effects, Megazoo gave you access to recovery, board wipes, swarming, mass stun, and raw muscle, obviously. Next, Megazoo exploits the security stack in what used to be a relatively novel way, by treating it as a form of removal. Before we had proper security control, Megazoo, by virtue of its Digimon lineup, could usually count on the opponent's Digimon slamming into something big and getting deleted in a security battle. And with the relatively low DP thresholds in the game's first sets, even enemy level 6s were not safe swinging into Megazoo's security. And of course, since Megazoo players run a ton of high DP Digimon, you could probably swing into your opponent's security relatively uncontested. And finally, Megazoo takes advantage of the way that Digimon's memory system works. The memory gauge goes to 10 on either side, with each player keeping turn as long as the memory doesn't pass 0 to the opponent's side. The quirk is that you aren't limited to the memory on your side of the gauge. If you're at 1 memory and you want to play a 5-cost Digimon, you can make that play, spending 1 memory on your side and passing over 4 for your opponent to work with. So, expanding that out to bigger plays, your opponent can still slam down expensive level 6s as long as there's enough memory available to do so. So if the Megazoo player is at 3, they can slam down that 13-cost Craniumon without any issue. Sure, they're giving you 10 memory to work with, but if you can't respond with all of that memory at your disposal, then they come out of the exchange looking pretty solid. Now, all that's not to say that Megazoo is an unbeatable strategy, obviously. Quite the opposite. It's an extremely high-risk, high-reward approach to the game, and it has some very exploitable weaknesses. In Digimon, you typically only draw at the start of your turn or when digivolving. So in a deck that wants to slam big bodies, you can run out of cards very fast, or just never find your combo pieces at all. If you don't have a solid suite of answers for your opponent's deck in your starting hand, then you could be in for a very rough time. And of course, when you're passing over so much memory, you do fall prey to extremely tempo-efficient decks. Especially now, on the eve of BT13 in the English language format, passing over 3 memory can get you blown out. Passing over 8, 9, even 10, well, yeah, good luck with that. Finally, Megazoo is extremely vulnerable to memory choking. And while you can't choke someone at 0 if you leave them at 1, there are only a handful of megas that you can hardcast. And since Megazoo doesn't draw that much, there's a chance that you can force your opponent to pass without a play if you repeatedly choke them to 1. In the balance, Megazoo is a risky strategy, but in the game's early era, the payoff was often worth it. And as we'll see shortly, in those much simpler times, Megazoo was a solid pick and was more than capable of competitive results. And a big contributing factor to the early success of Megazoo was the absurd number of chunky bodies that filled its ranks. Because of the relatively wide card pool available to a Megazoo player, what with not caring for the most part about color requirements, Megazoo decks are kind of hard to classify. You see many of the same cards smushed together, often with several quote-unquote engines splashed in to give the decks some flexibility. Think of early Yu-Gi-Oh! And how most decks were basically just good stuff with a light splash of an archetype for flavor. Still, there were some general packages or approaches to Megazoo that we can hone in on. A common theme among Megazoo decks was the reliance on some form of a rookie package. You did need to draw sometimes, and often you needed reliable access to certain colors in order to play blowout option cards, so your Digitama and rookies could do double duty. A blue package was the most common, with Demi-Vmon and Vmon providing a blue source, a free chip attack thanks to jamming, and a draw 1 off of the eggs effect. To this, you might add in a few copies of the old Draw Gabumon, or Drabumon as he's affectionately known. The blue sources gave you access to powerful removal like Kakaida's Breath, but it also enabled Kaiser Nail, which would become a staple in Megazoo variants. Just put a pin in that one for the moment. A yellow package was less common but still viable. Typically, you'd see BT3 Upamon and BT2 Salamon combined to draw you a card and recover 1 when you got to 3 security or less. It was less aggressive than the Vmon package and didn't really accommodate other rookies, but as security control would prove, this package did have staying power. There was also a purple package taking advantage of Tapirmon and Gabumon to draw plenty of cards alongside Demi-Meramon while you were busy crashing into security. And finally, in later sets, we would see a very niche red base with Digimon and starter deck Guilmon providing easy access to Gaia Force, Atomic Blaster, and a way to cheat into BT2 Gallantmon as a finisher. As far as the megas themselves are concerned, the most common picks among all variants of Megazoo were, funny enough, the Dark Masters. Piedmon, Metal Seedramon, Machine Dramon, and Puppetmon were all powerful level 6s with extremely potent on-play effects for the time. And in almost every case, they were pretty cheap by level 6 standards. Piedmon has Retaliation and on play will summon out 2 level 4 or lower purple Digimon. This card was often used as a finisher, allowing you to establish lethal out of nowhere in an era where wide removal was rare. However, Piedmon also saw the least play because it was somewhat color reliant, and not every deck had an easy way to get a few purple Digimon in the trash to make the most out of its effect. He's also the most expensive out of the group. Metal Seedramon, however, was extremely popular, offering the ability to bounce 2 level 4s on play, and it came with the nifty ability to be unblockable by your opponent's sourceless Digimon, which made it very handy in the mirror match. Being blue, it also provided an easy stepping stone to BT1 Omnimon, which was basically the boss monster par excellence in the early game. Machine Dramon, glory to the Metal Empire, was one of the first black cards, and did exactly what you'd expect him to do. On play, he de-digivolves 2 Digimon by 2 levels, and then sticks around as a beefy blocker. Now, de-digivolution wasn't quite as good back in the day because it rarely came alongside removal, and at the cost of casting Machine Dramon, somebody could probably just digivolve back up. Still, big blockers are good, and it made for a stepping stone to the other 2 level 7s that dominated the early game, Millenniummon and Omnimon Alter S. And finally, we have Puppetmon, who was kind of the game's Quartzmon back in the day, if you really think about it. Its on-play effect suspends an opponent's Digimon, and then none of your opponent's suspended Digimon can unsuspend during the start of their turn. This allows you to lock down the opponent for a turn and buy time to stabilize your position. Puppetmon is also a play enabler of sorts because he gains 1 memory on the swing, and that could be the difference between passing turn or slamming down another big body. As far as clearly defined Megazoo archetypes go, the deck par excellence was Ragnazoo. Before we got Jogress Ragnalordmon, the original was something to be feared, offering brute force and the ability to become an absurdly chonky reboot blocker. The cool thing about this Ragnalordmon was that on Digivolution, it could absorb either a Durandamon or a Briwe Ludramon from your hand into its sources in order to essentially refund its Digivolution cost. Both Durandamon and Briwe Ludramon had the notable distinction of being megas that only cost 10 to play, which means you could play around memory choking in Ragnazoo to a degree. But what really made Ragnazoo a potent deck was the inclusion of Kaisernail. When running a blue package, Ragnazoo could use Kaisernail to play out a Digimon from Ragnalordmon's sources, often the sword or shield that you'd equipped for free on the climb up, or a more situationally appropriate mega like Machine Dramon. This allowed the deck to swarm the board very quickly, potentially climbing into multiple Ragnalordmons, which would usually be game at that point. In a similar vein to Ragnazoo, you had decks that basically just looked to turbo into level 7s very quickly. These would typically skew red and black since Omnimon Alter S, Ragnalordmon, and Millenniummon all evolved off of a black source. Alter S was a board wipe, which could become unblockable. Ragna had the benefits we already mentioned, and Millenniummon could spin something to the bottom of the deck and revive itself when deleted as long as it had sources when it went boom. With BT4 Great Legend and then BT5 Battle of Omni coming out, Megazoo got some new toys, including Blitz Omnimon, Omnimon Zwart, and Omnimon Zwart Defeat. In particular, Zwart Defeat was a welcome inclusion because it was a free mega when checked in security, and it could delete anything upon its own demise. And of course, it just slotted very nicely into those level 7 turbo decks because it also evoed off of a black level 6. Around this time, you also started to see more green and yellow Megazoo variants popping up, with these leaning into Magna Angemon, Lucamon, and Seraphimon to essentially play a scuffed security control strategy. Puppetmon would give you the ability to stun things and buy time for recovery, and once you'd stuck a mega, you could aggro with Seraphimon or climb up into one of the 2 Chaosmons for some serious removal. These decks also took advantage of BT1 Titamon to always have a play when low on memory, or BT2 Magnadramon to recover in dire circumstances. As for security control itself, the deck began to differentiate itself from Megazoo by leaning more into option-based removal. Still, if you compare a yellow-green Megazoo list and a security control list at that time, around BT4 to BT5, you'd see much of the same DNA. Now, this definitely does not cover everything. People were constantly cooking up their own spicy lists in every color and with almost every level 6 conceivable. Megazoo was thriving, and I honestly think that this represents one of the most creative eras in the competitive history of the Digimon TCG. But as we all know, the good times rarely last, and Megazoo was about to face an extinction level event. I think it's fair to say that Megazoo, at least in its original incarnation, was always doomed to die out. Digimon, like any other TCG, would get faster over time, allowing decks to do so much more with the memory they were given on any turn. So slamming down to level 6 and passing your opponent 10 memory would become a riskier play with every set that came out, and eventually it would become outright foolish. The first big blow to Megazoo's viability came in BT5, with the introduction of the Lord Nightmon archetype. The titular Crusader and his army of yellow Digimon could very quickly swarm the board, hardcasting level 5s for free and using DP reduction to wipe out everything in sight, often no matter how big any given stack was. Thanks to cards like Promo Pulsemon, Bushi Agumon, and Spiral Masquerade, Lord Nightmon just had the tools to overwhelm basically any deck. and Lord Nightmon himself did not fear Megazoo's security thanks to his ability to massively buff his DP as the board got wider. Still, Megazoo would somehow hang on through the Tier 0 Lord Nightmon format, only to run into the meat grinder that was BT6. Agabubon and Agubond raised the power ceiling of the game to previously unseen heights, leveraging the speed of Rookie Rush, the cheap option-based removal of security control, and the ability to output absurd damage in one turn. These decks were so dominant that even Lord Nightmon, the undisputed king from just one set back, dropped off hard. So, I mean, what do you think that did to Megazoo's numbers? BT7 Next Adventure would all but ensure that Megazoo stayed dead, with blue hybrids securing absolute dominance over the meta. You couldn't slam down a Searcher rookie without fear of having it frozen and giving your opponent 4 or more memory for free at the start of their turn. So what do you think would happen if you dropped your big sourceless level 6 against blue hybrids? Sadly, the original incarnation of Megazoo was properly extinct by this point, and we would never see the archetype in its original form, even at the most niche of the local level. The game had just become too fast and too complex for Megazoo to thrive. But while Megazoo proper was dead, the notion of it would inspire the design of many decks to come. The first proper successors to Megazoo recognized that it simply wasn't viable to just slam down a big body, pass a ton of memory, and maybe pop a small body or two. No, if a deck wanted to make slamming a level 6 worthwhile, the payoff would need to be much greater. Released in BT6 Double Diamond, Beelstarmon would give players the first practical alternative to Megazoo, even if it wasn't readily apparent at the time. Beelstarmon was part of the 3 Musketeers archetype, all of which have effects that interact with 7-cost option cards. Both of its counterparts, Magna Kidmon and Gundramon, trigger their effects when digivolving, but Beelstarmon triggers her effect on play. Beelstarmon on play will recur a 7-cost option card from the trash, and then you can use a 7-cost option card from your hand for free. This allows you to cast powerful options like Trump Sword and Fly Bullet while putting a body on board. However, with Beelstarmon being a 12-cost level 6, the value of her effect would be iffy at best if that's all she did. But she also has a clause that allows you to reduce her play cost by 1 for every other 3 Musketeer and 7-cost option card that you have in the trash. So the longer the game goes on and the bigger your trash gets, the cheaper Beelstarmon becomes. Thanks to her gimmick and the ability to play a pseudo security control game, Beelstarmon became extremely popular right away. And funny enough, the Musketeers deck basically dispensed with all of its evolution-based pieces and ended up revolving entirely around Beelstarmon and her powerful on-play effect. And in a cool nod to the early purple-ish Megazoo variants, Beelstar could make a cool play with the option card Nailbone in order to slam herself down and then summon 2 level 4 or lower purple bodies. Well, one of them has to be a level 3, but you get the point. The next successor to Megazoo came in EX1 Classic Collection, giving a fresh lease on life to the long-ignored Dark Master, Machinedramon. Old Mugen returned as the set's secret rare, and like Beelstarmon, it provided a very novel way to slam a Mega for maximum impact. Machinedramon has an on-play effect to tuck 5 level 5 cyborgs from your hand or trash into its evolution sources in order to gain 1 memory for each one that you place. So while you initially play Machinedramon for a hefty 12 memory, after the refund, you've essentially only paid 7. Now already that's pretty good, but you need your Mega to do something once it sticks. And well, Machinedramon's thing is that he's sticky. In addition to gaining all the inheritable effects of the cyborgs it absorbed, it can detach 2 of them whenever it would be deleted in order to preserve itself on the field. This makes Machinedramon a terrifying boss monster with layers of protection and the ability to build a very imposing stack despite not digivolving up. Finally, I've got to give a special mention to one of the jankier and less well-known Megazoo successors in Omnimon X Turbo. This deck takes advantage of Avenged Kidmon, a literal counter to the aforementioned Musketeers deck, who can reduce his play cost by shuffling back all option cards and Musketeers into both players' decks, with his cost reduced by 1 for each card that's returned. Alongside a very aggressive discard and mill engine, you can constantly fill up your trash to play Avenged Kidmon for cheap, and since he's red, you can then evolve into a number of Omnimons, usually Omnimon X for its security burn and powerful removal effect. Now, looking at the immediate successors to Megazoo, both Machinedramon and Beelstarmon have stuck around surprisingly long. Even if they do lack the zoo aspect, at least in their original incarnations, these decks really did carry the spirit of Megazoo forward until Bandai finally decided to give the archetype another shot. And boy, when Bandai set their mind to trying to make Megazoo work again, they did get creative. For better and for worse. So how do you reinvent an archetype that requires big, expensive plays, throttles your draw power, and needs to exist in a game that now runs at breakneck speed? Well, Bandai had a few novel innovations up their sleeve. BT10 saw Bandai dipping their toes into the vast waters of the Megazoo Ocean with the Bagra Army deck. Now, I know what you're thinking. Bagra Army is not Megazoo. Well, no, not in the conventional sense, but that is kind of the point. It takes some of the original ideas and tries to improve on them. If you look at the core of Bagra Army, it is actually built like Megazoo. You have a series of powerful level 6s with on-play effects who basically act as your win condition. On the initial release in BT10 Cross Encounter, we got Blastmon and Tactimon. BT11 Dimensional Phase would add Lilithmon to the roster, as well as the titular boss monster Bagramon. And finally, BT12 Across Time capped things off with the level 7 Darkness Bagramon. What Bandai did to try and make Bagramon Army Megas work was leverage the new Digicross mechanic, and provide a base that would allow you to cycle cards and control the opponent, theoretically. Unlike Crossheart or Blue Flare, none of the Bagra Army bosses, except for Darkness Bagramon, require specific Digicross materials. Instead, you use purple Digimon saved under the tamer U Amano as the materials, placing them in the sources of your Bagra Army Megas in order to reduce their play costs and give them, of course, some materials to work with and some powerful inheritables. The materials, that is the level 3 and level 4 Bagra Army pieces, are mostly there to search, swing in for chip damage, and then save under U Amano, the deck's dedicated tamer, in order to cycle more cards and gain a bit of memory. They almost all have skills that net you a memory on the opponent's turn when they're trashed from the stack, which is typically how the Bagra Army Megas will trigger their most impactful effects. Blastmon has Rush, and if played with at least 3 sources, he can Blitz. Then, on the opponent's turn, he can trash a material to pop an enemy level 4 or lower Digimon when the opponent attacks. Tactimon tucks sources and then, in a loose callback to Piedmon, summons back 2 level 4 or lower Bagra Army Digimon from the trash, imbuing them with Blocker. Then, if you need to trash a material for a Bagra Army effect, you can use materials under Tactimon to pay the cost instead. Lilithmon mills 4 on play, adds 2 Bagra Army targets from the trash to the hand, and then tucks 2 Bagra Army targets under one of your tamers. On the opponent's turn, she can trash a material when they promote a Digimon from the raising area to force that Digimon to pay 3 memory if they want to attack. Bagramon, the eponymous boss monster of the archetype, has a very interesting on-play effect. If your opponent has 1 or fewer Digimon in play, you look at your opponent's hand and trash 1 card in it. If they have 2 or more Digimon in play, you can tuck one of your opponent's Digimon under one of their other Digimon at the bottom of its stack. The latter effect is a pretty unique form of removal that dodges almost all forms of protection in the game. Bagramon also has an all-turns effect that triggers when your opponent digivolves or an effect places a card into one of their stacks. Once per turn, this effect allows you to trash a material under Bagramon in order to trash the top card of the opponent's security. Bagramon's evolved form, Darkness Bagramon, has a hefty 16 play cost, and yes, an on-play effect, where it can delete an opponent's Digimon outright, no restrictions. Then it absorbs up to 5 Bagra Army targets from the trash into its stack. And on the opponent's turn, if they digivolve or declare an attack, Darkness Bagramon can trash 5 materials to return all tamers on the field to the hand. The Bagra Army archetype represents real creativity on the part of the game's designers. But its competitive results have been almost non-existent. Why? Well, it suffers from one of the same weaknesses that the original Megazoo deck had, in that it's just too slow. And even with the ability to steal memory looking really powerful on paper, decks from BT9 onward have a nasty habit of being so fast that they just ignore the memory system. So you can generate plenty of free value that Bagramon's goons just can't mess with. Also, despite the cost reduction, with only Blastmon offering the ability to attack right away and Bagramon clearing protected stacks, you're still passing over way too much memory for very little immediate value. Still, one failed experiment wouldn't stop the designers from trying again. In EX3 Dragonic Roar, we actually received several soft reboots to Megazoo in Dorbickmon, Hina, Chaosdramon, and the 4 Great Dragons. Starting with the 4 Great Dragons, this is an archetype revolving around 4 mega-level Digimon: Goldramon, Magnadramon, Megidramon, and Azulongmon. Tying them all together is the option card Trial of the 4 Great Dragons. This 8-cost option card has a main effect to draw a card and then place itself in the battle area like a memory boost would. Then its delay effect allows you to trash it in order to play one of the 4 Great Dragons from your hand for free. Now, as crazy as that sounds, the option card does have a few notable restrictions on the megas that it plays. First, the Digimon played by the effect cannot digivolve into a level 7. And second, that Digimon is deleted at the end of the opponent's turn. So what do the 4 Great Dragons actually do? Well, 3 of them have powerful on-play effects that revolve around controlling the board or gaining a measure of advantage, and one of them is the deck's dedicated finisher. Magnadramon's on-play effect applies a blanket security -1 debuff to the opponent's entire field, but if it's played by the effect of the trial, you apply a security -2 debuff instead. Basically, it allows you to stall the opponent for a turn, even in the face of aggressive red decks. And on deletion, Magnadramon lets you play a Trial of the 4 Great Dragons from your hand as long as you don't already have one in play, which is an effect that's shared by the next 2 dragons. Megidramon's on play allows you to delete an opposing level 5 or lower Digimon, and if you play him by the Trials effect, you can reach a little higher and pop a level 6 or lower instead. Azulongmon on play will draw you 2 cards, and if he's played by the Trial, you gain 2 memory as well. And finally, we have Goldramon, the only member of the 4 dragons without an on-play effect. Instead, it has a when digivolving effect to recur a 4 Great Dragons card, including the Trial, from the trash to your hand. And then, Goldramon has a when attacking effect that allows you to return the other 3 dragons from your trash to the bottom of your deck in order to trash the top 2 cards of the opponent's security. Now, you'll of course notice that none of the 4 Great Dragons have Rush, which is a waste considering the fact that you can play them for free. They get some good value on play, sure, but outside of Goldramon, they don't really do much to progress the game state. The solution to that problem, or at least the bandage that Bandai came up with, is the rest of the archetype. The 4 Great Dragons are supported by 2 evolution lines which culminate in Aerovidramon and Angelwomon. Aerovidramon and Angelwomon both allow you to play the trial for free if you don't have one in play, and then they provide some additional value while on board. Aerovidramon gets blocker while you have a trial or one of the Great Dragons in play, and Angelwomon inflicts a -3000 DP buff to something when you play the trial or one of the dragons. Ideally, while building up into the winged helpers, you'll get EX3 Gatomon or EX3 Vidramon in their stacks, both of which confer Rush to anything played by the trial. Now, in theory, the deck has everything it needs to function, but as this lengthy section probably suggests, it's just too many working parts. The trial is expensive, requiring you to either hard cast it for a hefty cost and little immediate value, I mean it literally just draws a card on play, or you can spend slightly less memory by building up into one of the helpers to play it for free. But even then, the trial has to sit in play for 1 turn before you can use it to play out one of the dragons for free. In the meantime, your opponent might out your helper stack, which will deprive you of Rush and any other passive bonuses your dragons might get. And even then, if you stick one of the dragons with Rush, you're dealing 1 damage and slightly inconveniencing the opponent. Then the dragon goes away and your opponent has a turn to out your helpers again or just build back up. And of course, if you don't have another trial in hand when your dragon goes boom, well, you lose a ton of momentum. Goldramon can lethal the opponent, sure, but you'll never live long enough to get there most of the time. And it's reliant on having a stack in play, either to digivolve on top of one of the helpers, or to gain rush from one of the helpers when played by the trial. So no stack, no trashing security for lethal. Just like Bagra Army, 4 Great Dragons haven't done anything competitively, and are instead reserved for those who are riding high on the hopium and anyone who doesn't mind wasting $10 to get blasted at locals. Yeah, I know it's looking pretty grim, but trust me, EX3 continued its attempts to solve the Megazoo problem, and they get slightly more successful as we go on. The next stab that Bandai would take at it would be the Hina Lynx archetype. Hina Lynx is a deck focused on Metallic Dramon and Volcanic Dramon, both of which are level 6s that sport removal and conditional floodgate effects on play. Metallic Dramon de-digivolves a target and then pops a 5-cost or less Digimon. But if nothing is deleted, it applies a blanket effect to prevent Digivolution by unsuspended Digimon. So your opponent will need to swing and survive if they want to climb up. But that'll be difficult since Metallic Dramon also has blocker and reboot while you have a tamer in play. Volcanic Dramon deletes all of your opponent's Digimon with the lowest DP on play, but if it doesn't delete anything, it prevents your opponent from playing any Digimon with 6000 DP or less. Then, while you have a tamer in play, Volcanic Dramon will trash the top card of the opponent's security on the swing. Now, being megas with on-play effects is cool, but that's hardly enough to give Hina Lynx a competitive edge. So the innovation Bandai made in this case was allowing the deck the flexibility to play as a Megazoo or as a conventional Digivolution deck. The deck's dedicated tamer, Hina, allows you to treat the on-play effects of both dragons' lines as when digivolving effects by suspending her. So in situations when you can't slam something big, you can still take advantage of their potent on-play effects. It's a really cool idea, but the problem is that it made the deck overly reliant on its tamer. Without Hina in play, you could be forced to make those expensive, hard slams that, yes, could blow up the opponent's board or force them to hide in raising for a turn, but the effects weren't quite enough to keep up with fast decks like Melga, Blue Lord, or Blue Flare. And if you were digivolving up, well, your Digimon were essentially vanillas because they all just had on-play effects, not when digivolving. Hina Lynx did see some competitive success, however, mostly in the Latin American and European regions, where it was paired with the new starter deck Ragna Lordmon and its EX3 compatriot Dorbickmon to erupt into a powerful game-ending combo that would nuke the opponent's board, trash all of their security, and blitz for game. Now, Dorbickmon himself is a nice little nod to Megazoo, and coming out in EX3 alongside Hina Lynx, it seemed tailor-made to support the archetype. Dorbickmon is a red level 6 that normally plays for 13, however, it has the ability to digicross, using materials from a broad range of targets that include various types of dragons and dinosaurs. You can tuck up to 5 sources, allowing Dorbickmon to reduce its cost down to just 3 in the best case, and if you tuck all 5 sources, Dorbickmon has an on-play deletion effect that can ramp up to removing a 13,000 DP body. Now, outside of Hina Lynx, Dorbickmon is a great finishing play for any dragon or dinosaur-based deck, but on its own, it plays as a really cool OTK deck, or even a kinda janky Kaiser Nail and Tidal Wave deck that can spam out other level 6 dragons and dinosaurs with their own on-play effects. The OTK variant of Dorbickmon is more popular, of course, and ultimately ended up seeing more success than Hina Lynx ever did. EX3's final nod to Megazoo, or at least one of its spiritual successors, was the introduction of a new Chaos Dramon. This upgraded form of Machine Dramon brought some much-needed protection against bounce and spin effects. And alongside the ability to tuck sources on play, it can also tuck sources when digivolving, allowing Machine Dramon the flexibility to build a stack when the slam and pray approach isn't ideal. Sadly, Chaos Dramon does not allow you to gain back any memory when tucking sources, but when it does tuck a source on Digivolution or on play, you can de-digivolve one of your opponent's stacks by 1 level for each source that you tuck. And hey, this thing still works with Attack of the Heavy Mobile Digimon, so you can always slam it down in a much cooler version of Hybrid for game. And from there, Bandai basically took a small break from trying to make Megazoo work again. BT11 and BT12 breezed by with barely a bone thrown to Megazoo players. Machine Dramon got some new pieces that have really transformed it into a level 6 Machine Zoo deck, but those pieces are increasingly skewing towards a stack building approach, so in a way it's also pulling further away from its roots. We also got Mervamon, which in a surprising trend from Bandai once again called back to the original Piedmon's effect, allowing you to summon back to level 4 or lower purple bodies or cross hearts if you're playing that variant of the deck, and then it imbues them all with rush and blocker if they are either cross hearts or have the retaliation keyword. Really, as a strategy, Megazoo in its old form and in the recent revival still can't really keep up with modern decks. And, in BT11 and BT12, decks like Black War Greymon X, Merva Cross, funny enough, and Beelzemon all have the tools to outspeed most conventional decks and blow them out in just 2 to 3 turns. And of course, with how memory efficient things like Black War Greymon or Beelzemon are, well, it's pretty clear that Megazoo is not going to have a fun time playing into most meta decks these days. That said, there is hope on the horizon. In the JP meta, EX4 Alternative Being saw experimentation with Beelstarmon, using the Mill engine and new Beelstarmon out of the Beelzemon starter deck to turbo out old Beelstar, or climb quickly into powerful level 7s like the starter deck Beelzemon Blast mode and the new Shine Greymon Ruin mode. And of course, Megazoo proper is about to make a triumphant return in BT13 versus Royal Knights. The deck has seen massive competitive success, sporting a playstyle that can stall while building towards an absolutely anime-level finishing play where you blow up your Yggdrasil and play out a veritable army of Royal Knights, all with rush and the ability to reboot and block if they don't end the game right there. Finally, while details for BT15 Exceed Apocalypse are scarce, we're certain that the 4 Dark Masters will return, and we're almost certain that they're going to take the lessons learned from the last few sets to really recapture the power and glory of their original Megazoo days. All right, and that will wrap things up for this hefty video essay. Megazoo is so broad as an archetype, and Bandai has done so many subtle callbacks to it that I'm sure I've missed something along the way. But hey, hopefully you've all enjoyed the deep dive regardless, and thank you for waiting the long time it took me to throw this one together. Trust me, it was a doozy. Now, if you did enjoy the video, then hey, hit me with that thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. Your support keeps me going while I toil away, grinding out scripts, researching, and navigating the absolutely bloated After Effects timelines that something like this takes to make. And hey, if you have any fond memories of playing Megazoo, or you have your own unique recipe tucked away in a cupboard somewhere and you're really proud of it, then go ahead and share those in the comments section down below. Theories on what the BT15 Dark Masters and Apocalypse are gonna do are also appreciated as well. I love to speculate. I'm totally down to brainstorm, hope, cope, whatever it is, and I'll probably toss a couple of my own theories in a pinned comment below. Anyway, I will catch you all in the next one, and until then, peace.